You're going to introduce him.
If you catch him, yeah. Because the camera's going to want to hear what Dr. Schumacher is saying. Hey, really? No, but you're playing in the movies. The other session.
Watch out for this one.
We're really happy that Dr. Schumacher can be with us, and of course, you're all waiting to ask some questions. And since we just got through talking to Edith about I really am learning from this class, and Mike is the student that's teaching the class, Mike is consented to moderate, and we're ready for questions.
Between the two of us, you moderate.
That'll be a difficult job. Well, between the whole room, I have to moderate.
Well, this is we really are closing the gap of the generations, don't you see?
Okay, well, I suppose we'll just start off with if there's anything in general either of you have to say to all of us young people out here who are
How much do they know
coming
about
in.
Dr. Schumacher and intermediate technology?
They know enough.
They do? Well, isn't that
And,
helpful?
I mean, we're all coming into the economic labor market in our own time and in our own way. And I was just wondering, I mean, do you have something to say?
Well, we get questions. That'll set us off.
I'd like to ask you about the Buddhist economics chapter in your book. There was one part where you said that they consider women going to work as, for them, for their economic system, as bad as for us taking somebody from did you say a laborer and using him for a soldier. And I was just wondering, I don't know, I think that there are Buddhist people all over the world, and I was just wondering what Buddhist society that you were talking about, and I mean...
The only Buddhist society that I know a bit is Burma. And there, if you look out of the window, you find mothers playing with their children in this lovely climate. And the children are well looked after, the mothers are happy. To compare that with a lot of mothers who have to commute into a city, to do factory work, there's simply no comparison. And to make a religion out of going out to work, it would seem to them to be absolutely crazy, particularly when this means that the children have no one to look after them.
What do you feel about the way the Chinese do it? Because, you know, in communist China now, the government not only encourages the women to go to work, but in all the factories there, they have child care centers, so that the children are not looked after. They're very well looked after, and the mother is very close to them. Do you think that the way whatever Buddhist society you were talking about is keeping the mothers out of work to take care of the children, do you think that the Chinese way would be a better alternative, or what?
It's not a question of keeping them out of work. It's a question of not making economic arrangements that they have to work and the children run wild. If they want to work, of course they can work. Everybody's always happy, welcome to work. And if arrangements are made, as in many parts of Red China, that the children are looked after, then they may well be free to work. If they are not looked after, and nobody looks after them, neither father nor mother, then of course socially this is a very bad thing, because that's the next generation. No, it's not a matter of stopping anyone, whether man or woman, from going to work. It's a matter of looking at the economic arrangements so that people who don't really want to work because they want to look after children, that they are not driven into the factories for reasons that without it they can't survive, they can't make ends meet.
In other words, freedom to choose your alternatives, isn't that what it would be?
On the whole, in Asiatic countries, I know China is now the exception, the mother wants to look after children. Now, if they can't do it because they haven't got enough money and they have to go to office or factory, then who looks after the children? Yeah. I think some things interest you more than what I'm saying. Now let's have another question.
I see, when I hear you saying, you know, women don't need to do this, they can stay home, and, you know, if they like that. My only problem is, how is it worked so that the women don't have to stay home or don't have to go to work? I mean, I can see the philosophy and I agree with it, I think it's beautiful, but I don't know where or what to do.
If the wage is adequate so that it supports, the man's wage is adequate so that it supports the family, then the women don't have to. They may still want to, but they don't have to. If the wage is inadequate, then maybe the family needs 2 breadwinners. That's all.
My only problem with that is that I see, you know, I understand, you know, you need enough money for that, but a lot of times there just isn't enough money, no matter what. I mean, you need 2 breadwinners, and even if there are 2 breadwinners, there isn't enough money. How is it worked so that there will be? I mean, what can you say so that there will be enough money, or?
Where and what? And there are plenty of people who have got enough money, haven't they? If there's a very uneven distribution and very low wages are being paid, well then of course there isn't. In this country, in the United States, the average income per head is twice that of Western Europe. So there should be enough money for everything. So why is there any poverty in this country? That hasn't got anything to do with the total amount. It's got something to do with certain social arrangements, which you can call a very bad distribution.
How do we change that?
Well, the unions, labor unions, are in the process of changing it, but there's so many people left out of it, and they are defenseless. They can only gain some bargaining power if they get together and fight for it.
Well, somebody else?
I was wondering that, first of all, I agree with intermediate technology. I think it's, you know, something that should be looked to as an alternative to our way we're going now. But I was wondering how, in this day and age, we'd be able to switch from a very international trade, you know, intensive society. How would we switch down to a more intermediate type, localized type of technology?
Well, what are we talking about? Instead of, for instance, putting all research and development into making bakeries bigger and bigger and more automated and fewer of them, and letting the bread travel 500 miles from the bakery to the point of consumption, instead of that development, which has been taking place over the last, particularly last 50 years, we are saying, let's put our best intelligence into making efficient small equipment so that you can have a bakery around in every little village or town, and not these big vans taking bread over 500 miles. Because it's nice to have a bakery around the corner. Bakers on the whole, I'm a baker myself, are nice people, homely people, and then you can even get real bread. Whereas if the bread has to be so prepared that it can travel hundreds of miles, you've got to take all the vitality out of the bread first. Otherwise it goes moldy, and you can't risk that. So, but as a society, we have neglected developing the small-scale equipment for the small people in the small places. And so the big corporations, their technology, which is a large-scale technology, that's been very well looked after. So they grab everything. And that's why you have many of those things in the distribution of income. That's why we also have unemployment. Because, I mean, what jobs are there if everything you need is bought from a big corporation then in your little place or your community there is no work. Everybody has to go out to work. And if the corporations haven't provided enough work, workplaces, then we're left with unemployed people. And they really are in a desperate state.
So I was wondering how you could change, our society right now is such that I'm just wondering how it'd be possible to go from how we're doing now with, like you say, taking bread 500 miles. Maybe that isn't quite so good an answer because not necessarily an answer, but an example, because that can be done right easily within a community. But I'm thinking like of imported cars and televisions and things like that. The larger items, which, how are we going to change the process, the way it's going now? You can't just all of a sudden say we're not going to produce let any more imported televisions or cars come into the country, and we're going to start producing them in a small community.
Let's stick to the vital things. You just dismiss bread as if it was nothing much. Well, I mean, it's more important than television, isn't it?
No, what I'm saying is it's easier to...
Well, then let's do the easy things. Let's do the easy things.
Still have the others as being trade between countries.
Yes, as Gandhi said, one step at a time is good enough for me. So let's do the easy things. It's always wise to start with the easy things. Then you learn the business. And then you find, people will raise all kinds of objections against the very possibility that you could re-establish small bakeries all over the place. They say, oh no, they have all gone out of business. So how can they come back? Well, they've gone out of business because transport was very cheap, and because all the research and development went into the big equipment and not into the small equipment. So now, if we can form working groups, as is happening, to design the small equipment, make that really efficient, then they can come back. So let's start with a baker and turn to automobiles at a later stage.
We need to change. We need the big companies. We have to get, as a people, we have to get the big companies to change and work with them to make things small.
Yes, we'll work with anybody, even with government. But I say we don't sit back and wait for anyone to do it for us. We get together, all the various resources, find people in the academic institutions, find people in business, find people in government, find people in the labor unions, find people in the voluntary groups such as have come together on this occasion, and get down to work. That's all.
Dr. Schumacher, if you could succeed in like having your bakers, a bakery in every village or something like that, do you have any ideas on what would be an efficient political system for these kinds of small communities that would be, because that's always a problem in anything. If you get too many people, they start going wild, and I just think that the system as it stands now has a lot of holes in it, but to think of a better one is quite a challenge. Do you have any theories?
Well, the present system or way of doing it will not fit into the future, because we are going into a period where energy will be very short and expensive. Now, the rising energy prices are already now very, very hard on the poor, particularly in the cities. Many of them want to get out. They can't make a living. They can't make ends meet in the cities. Where can they go to? They want to go into smaller places where they're not so entrapped. Well, what jobs are there? Now, if we can create jobs, or create a technology whereby people can set themselves up as what we now call self-employed, as a baker, or a tailor, and make a tolerable living, then at least these people have something to go to. They have some possibility. The system is always a matter of the distribution of power. Over the last 50 years, more and more power has been accumulated by the big corporations, because only they could handle the big technology. And the ordinary people have lost power. They've become more and more dependent. They can't set themselves up as producers, because only people already rich can do that. So if one can create a technology so that the smaller people are no longer so dependent on the big people, then you have changed their power.
Are you sort of saying, like, without sounding cliche, get back to basics? Because if you're saying that, I can see, getting back to things that aren't as, as expensive, and getting back to things that aren't as materialistic and such as they are now. But I can see falling back into it. I can see, like, being simple, having a simple life. But there's always people striving for power who want to get up and up and up. And I don't see how you can change human nature. You might be able to change technology and change all that other, but you can't change the drive to get on top. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean. Nor do I want to change human nature. But if you look around, all of you will one day want to enter, as you said, enter the labor market, which is a very ugly word. Probably need a job. And if you can't get one, if there aren't enough jobs, what do you do then? And then you discover, well, what can you do for yourself? And maybe you discover you can't do anything for yourself. You haven't learned anything that's really useful. Can you bake bread? Well, learn it right away. Learn it. Yes. Have you ever tried growing anything, vegetables? Now that's at least you can do it. Make it work. Other people can do it. So get something real. That's what I call learning. Something where you can feel, well, if the worst comes to the worst, I can always bake my own bread or grow my own vegetables. Then you feel much more powerful. Then you are not at the beck and call of anybody. Then you don't need so much. That's how power changes. A really well-trained tool maker who's gone through real training, he is not afraid. He says, I can always make my own tools. I can even build machines. He has his wealth in his hands and his head. He's not so dependent, and not likely to be so difficult, as you alluded to, you see. The difficult people are the fearful people who have reason to be fearful. They get panicky, or they get filled with hatred. But those who have learned something that adds to their self-reliance, these are normally wonderful people.
I was wondering, do you think that, I'm going to be, entering the age where I can, I'm supposed to go to college and all this, and I'm wondering if it's a good idea anymore to even go to college, because all you do is you learn your trade, and that's not going to be any need for that, because I should learn, the basic things. So.
Well, I would not presume to advise you, not knowing you and exactly the circumstances. I have knocked around at a number of universities, but never found it useful enough for me to take a degree. But I don't recommend it to anyone, because some people can only get on with degrees, you see. So I wouldn't know. But certainly to raise the question is very good. What do I really get out of it? Maybe one has to go through the motions, because then you are, whatever is BA or MA, and then you can get a job. Without it, you can't get a job. Maybe it's necessary for them. I think in future we shall need far more people who have actually learned how to make things and how to grow things. Practical knowledge. But not just any odd way, but solid. Well, those people will be indestructible.
Then you
Yes,
can
ma'am.
go into college later. I mean, or study whatever you need. But I think Dr. Schumacher's point is very well taken. I think many of you get sick and tired of going to school, you know, getting sort of canned goods. And somebody else, it drifts down, you know, from somebody and reading a lot of books, and then he writes a book about what he read in the books, you know. And anyway, I'm sure many of you would like a little hiatus. And I myself, as a mother, a mere mother, watched this happen. A break between grade schools and college and high school, and a break between high school and college. And don't forget, we made this system, so we can make another. We don't need to undo that system. We don't need to say that it's difficult or that this Goliath is here. Don't forget your little Davids, you know. And so the whole point is, if your lawn is all brown, you know, no water, what are you going to do? Can't say it's impossible? Even if you put one drop of water there or a cupful or something, you're going to get a little green. So you see, the whole point is, really, if you talk of alternative styles of living, what do you mean by that? Do you mean just dresses? Alternative styles of living is exactly what we're talking about. In other words, branch out and alternate the practical with the book study. It isn't you don't have to damn either one of them, do you? Why not alternate, and then you're on both sides of the fence at the same time, and then before you know it, you've got both at your disposal. And before you know it, things begin to change. One reason you see that we got the great big corporations, and there's nothing against corporations as though they're devils with horns, you know. Point is that it's just too much of a good thing, isn't that right? So the main thing is to think, well, what is something that could start right here? Now, this young lady right here, I know she honestly wanted to know, how do you begin? Well, you don't start finished, do you? You start at the beginning. And so, as Dr. Schumacher always said, put one foot in front of the other, and Gandhi said it. We all know that really Gandhi was a wonderful guy, and he certainly, it meant one foot after another, and India became what they thought at that time would be good, and maybe it is good, you know, but they're having their growing up pains. I'm not really championing their having stayed with England. I think it's very wonderful that they've had to solve their own problems and keep on solving them. But it's this idea of doing what you can where you are now, and doing it in a little exploratory way. And it really, the joy of doing something yourself, whether it's to grow something or make something, there's nothing like it, isn't that right? Even if it's an idea. But it's nice to have something tangible. You can always say, you know, well, after all, I can grow a tree, you know. And of course, when you really begin to study about growing trees and growing everything, then how they all come together. But you see, you begin to really see the gaps in this structure as you begin to fill in a little place. You don't just get it out of a book, you know that. You really get it out of doing it and seeing it for yourself. Now, that's a true experiment. See?
Can I ask you? You said that you put one foot in front of the other. I'd like to know, do you think that you should travel that road by yourself, or do you think that, like, to get where you're going, like, your goal would be with somebody or with some people who...
You bet. We're social people.
Okay.
Okay, I was wondering, you know how you said there's a great buildup of people on the East Coast between Boston and Washington, the one around the Chicago Midwest, and the one in central to lower California. I was wondering if you think to get the people back into the country, you know, to spread the people all around evenly and get small businesses all over, do you think we would need a total change of our government, a total change of our work system, or can we take what we have now and work with it, or is it so damaged now and is it so corrupt now that we just need a whole new one Or can we build on what we have? Do we have enough left to salvage?
I'm sure you always have to build on what you've got. It's a frightful disaster if everything goes kaput, everything goes fud. So, but again, it'll be done bit by bit. I was a couple of weeks ago in Montana. Now, Montana is a sparsely populated state, only 700,000 people, and they have a number of universities or similar institutions. They train, for every 100 people they train, only 15 can find a job in Montana. 85 find a job in Chicago, Los Angeles, and so on. So they are thinking, now what is our future? If this goes on, we should just die away, fade away. There are many nice places in Montana. We ought to now really, not the federal government, but the state government, take steps to make it more attractive to set up in these small places, rather than in the big conurbations. Well, then they discover many things, namely that there are countless laws which are against the small man and favor the big man. So these laws have to be sorted out. And so they start working. They start working on the ground. The same I find in many states of the United States. Everywhere, also private groups are starting working, sorting things out. Setting up some centers where you can get information. Is it possible to have an efficient small welding shop, foundry? Is it possible to make adequate and saleable textiles on a small scale? If we have all that timber in Montana, why do we send it all to Japan or to the rest of the United States and purchase more or less ill-made furniture from some big city? Why don't we make furniture in Montana? If we have the dairy, the farming, produce milk, why do we send the milk out of the country, out of the state, and import butter from Denmark? Isn't it possible to make good butter in Montana? Of course it is possible. So if people start working, then that is the way to change it.
Do you think that change, that putting things more on a local level and not wasting all the time and fuel and energy and effort in shipping everything back and forth, do you think that could happen in my lifetime?
It will happen in your lifetime,
Oh, yeah.
unless you're very sick now. It will have to happen. We haven't got the gasoline.
Right. Do you think that things could change before that year, that 1980?
Well, things have always a sort of momentum in them. They drift on, but the pressures increase. The fact that many parts of the United States ran out of gas during the winter or had experienced a severe gas shortage, where suddenly you have a factory entirely dependent on gas, and somebody comes along and says, sorry, we'll only deliver half of what you're used to. That's quite a thing. So these people are all thinking. They're all thinking of alternatives. And I was at a factory in Michigan last few days. This is woodworking, and all the shavings and all the bits and pieces, it's together with other rubbish, it's all dumped somewhere. Well, I can assure you they are thinking now, couldn't we use that as fuel? There's quite a lot of it, and not just as landfill. So this is going on now.
Remember, your questions are extremely valuable to you. Just for fun, hang on to those questions you asked. And don't expect them to be answered completely. But then you begin to answer your own question, or to ask somebody very close, like your teacher, your friend, and to answer somebody else's idea. Do you do this alone, or do you do it with others? Of course you do it with others, but you do it with yourself also, don't you? The whole answer really is both and, you know, rather than either or. Is it either big or is it little? See? No, it's both and. It's big and little and so on. Now, you had a question. What was it?
Oh, Well, I was going to ask a question earlier because, you know, I'm also a student in this class, so we all are. And
Oh.
yeah, this is something that's been on my mind for a long time, and it's very important to me because I know you mentioned in your book the idea of permanence as a virtue in most societies, and most people from philosophers and so forth that I'm familiar with also have said that, but in my own mind, I know I could never be happy and never be comfortable in a situation or society in which I could not change, or in which change was not going on, so that I could get into doing something new or get into doing something different and have the opportunity of new things constantly going on around me.
You seem to think that permanence means no change, and that isn't what
Well,
it means. It means a kind of process by which it doesn't deny itself, or that it doesn't destroy itself. Permanent agriculture means an agriculture that is self-energizing, and you use income rather than capital energies, and so on. So it may be, you know, language is a double-edged sword. Many times we read the word permanent, we say, oh, that means no change. It only means within its context. What does it mean within its context? Now, if that's your question, you should know John Jevons' work and various others. It's called Ecology Action, where they're doing this kind of small gardening, which has a vast background behind it, going back, I think, into Chinese and so on, 4,000 or 5,000 years. It's called French biodynamic. But it's worth investigating, because you get from 1 to 16 or 2 to 16 times more crop. You use from half to a 16th water. You do not compact the soil with heavy machinery, although that doesn't mean you don't use some tools. And anyway, it's worth looking at. And I do think that I don't know how many of you have a feeling for being related to nature, but it is really a great satisfaction, so they tell me, because I don't know much about it. I know about it, but I don't know much, having experienced it.
I just wonder how you started to develop your approach, which I kind of regard as a revolutionary approach, because you use the television, everything is getting bigger and bigger, and all of a sudden you say, wait, let's take a look and see what is happening, and there is economies and so forth in smaller things and working at the human scale. And I wonder if you developed this over a period of years, or if you just how did it come about?
Well, I noticed that many people are getting very sick of these big impersonal organizations, whether it's a very big school or a very big hospital or big government departments or big industry, because they can never really talk eye to eye. The official to whom they talk says, well, I'm sorry, but this is what the rules say. Everything is rules and regulations. Well, rules and regulations always make many hard cases. And bureaucracy is, when it becomes too big, it's not very human. So that's the negative thing. But then knocking around in the world, I found that, many things are done very beautifully in so-called poor countries, yielding a much greater level of real joyfulness. I shall never forget coming back from Burma and sitting in the what we call the underground, the tube, underground railway in London, and I looked at the people and I said, good gracious me, something terrible must have happened. They all look so sad. And so I inquired, nothing had happened. They looked like this all day long, you see. So I wasn't used to that anymore. So you become a bit critical. We are so proud of our achievements, but you can learn in other countries that they're not all that great in human terms. Well, now I'm an economist, And I find in economics everything begins with production and new methods to produce more and better and faster. Ah, yes, but what happens to the people? Oh, well, yes, of course, there are also people. And, we don't need them, they will be compensated, you see. But compensation never compensates. They're thrown out of a job and then they get a bit of money. But what they want is the job to get money, not the money. Well, the money is better than nothing, but compensation never compensates. If you get run over by a car and lose your legs and you get so much compensation, you're not compensated, are you? You're still without legs. So I noticed that the whole approach of modern economic thinking was not starting from people, but starting from goods, or production, or profits. So then I became more and more interested in writing about economics as if people mattered. And that then immediately implies that things must be human scale. Only then will people really matter.
And I wonder if, oh, excuse me.
I was told, I know that you're going to see President Carter this Tuesday, I believe. I was told you're going to see President Carter and you're going to talk about. I'd like to know if this is true, and if it is, I'd like to know what you'd have to say to him on as a nation, how our economic policy will be affected by it.
You have anywhere found that social, professional, and spiritual coordination institute exists somewhere in the United States or anywhere where they have performed
That what exists?
social, professional, and spiritual organization, coordination, one where
Social, professional, and spiritual organization.
and where the whole human is using all his potential.
Well, I find many places where people are trying. This is not a thing that can simply be legislated for. However, I still have a question hanging in the air, what I would say to President Carter if I would see him. Well, probably I'll answer his questions. Now, what he would ask me, heaven only knows.
I read recently, he's fascinated with your book.
Well, after all, he came from a small town, didn't he? Maybe only 200-300 people. I think he won't be too much. He knows. I understand they don't have crime there. Well, anyway, it's starting with the solution rather than the problem.
I would probably say something along these lines. Government is very good in collecting money, but not always very good in spending money where there are human problems. That's to say, the whole field of welfare. Now, welfare we ought to look after ourselves. Welfare ought to be looked after much more by these many, many voluntary organizations that exist. But they are not very effective because they are so short of money. So couldn't there be a deal that some of the money is used to support these voluntary organizations? They can do for $1, $10 work. Some way of bringing together public funds and private voluntary efforts, that might greatly relieve the public budgets and greatly increase the social work with eye-to-eye contact, where people really are treated as people, not as cases. You know, that is a typical case of a widow, and that is a compensation case, and so on. Yeah, but it is that, but it's also Mr. Smith or Mrs. Jones, who was quite a peculiar individual. But I'm not promising that I'll say that.
Well,
I don't know.
I have a kind of broad question, which is probably it kind of encompasses some of what these people have already said. But it's obvious through reading your book and, you know, just observing what's happening now, that our economic system as it is now cannot survive in the future. It just will not work. And, but I think it's human nature, or I don't know nature, but I see that people will keep clinging to it until it collapses, and then they're just left nowhere. How can we make people aware of what is happening? Because I don't think majority of people are. I mean, people are saying, oh, the energy crisis is a bunch of baloney and it's all a thing put on by big business and everything. How can we make people understand that this is really happening and see what the faults of our economic system are, and try and get them to start working in new directions within this system and using it, and to develop a better system before this system just totally collapses and we're just left nowhere. In other words, why do we have to wait for the big drop instead of, you know, trying to do something about it before we get to it?
We don't have to wait for the big drop.
How can we?
But I hear what you're saying. I just a little bit curious. How is it that you understand this?
Yeah.
And assume that most other people don't?
Maybe the others are learning too, are being made aware. After all, we have all this.
And people like, you know, people that are in my class with me, we understand it because we're willing to stop, take a look, and, you know, just as you did when you got into this.
Now again, I don't want to be nasty, but why do you assume that the others are not just like you?
Because I get the feeling just from going around and talking to other people that they just, you know, they just keep watching that television and taking everything that it spews out, and that colleges and government and everything are still pushing us faster and faster to keep going on the track that we are now. And, you know, I told this experience to my class. I went in to get a haircut a couple weeks ago, and there was a television on. And they were watching the news, and they started talking about the energy crisis, and all these barbers started going, baloney, oh, gee, that's a bunch of baloney. They're all just hyping this up and everything. And I think that, you know, there's still the majority of the people are thinking along those lines, and that there are very few people that are, you know, beginning to question the system that we're on now.
But I shouldn't worry about it. The majority always represent yesterday. This couldn't be otherwise. They represent yesterday. They are the great momentum, thank God, because otherwise these firebrands like you and me, we would upset the apple cart.
Not be a bad idea.
So the people who see the future in a new light and so on, they're always a minority. The question is it a sufficiently great minority? A sort of, as they say, critical mass. Well, it's still early days. After all, we have been belting along in this present-day economy for at least 100 years, got rather used to it, have never thought very much about energy shortages, always felt the sky is the limit. These buildings, carefully excluding all solar energy, all natural air, all dependent on a continuous use of mechanical energy. You see, these buildings have been built quite recently. Oh, I don't know how old they are. Does anybody know? Probably 10, 15, 20 years old.
10 years old.
10 years old. Well, there you are. So all this has been happening. You can't expect now suddenly everybody to turn around. It is, to me, surprising how quickly people are opening their eyes. Yeah? So I wouldn't be despondent about that. And I wouldn't really go on pressing such a question, if I may say so, because it leads to nothing. We can't make other people think. We can, of course, do our best to write, to speak, and then they will come along. They will come along.
I like your answer very much, but I also happen to agree with Eric that there aren't a lot of people taking into consideration what could happen. There's a lot of people, like up until a few weeks ago, until I started getting really into this class, I was thinking, oh, well, I don't care what happens to the world as long as I'm not alive when it happens, okay? And there's a lot of people thinking, I don't care as long as I'm dead and I don't have to deal with it, you know? And it's really frightening for me to see. I'm not expecting an answer to this. It's more like release is, for me. Let's just say this. I have dreams of doing things, being my own boss. And I see things like, I see small businesses not working because there are big businesses taking control over the small businesses. And I don't see those two working together. And that kind of crushes my dreams, and then the people not caring and me not caring, you know? So it's like, I'm real confused at this point of what path to take. Should I care about all this? Should I take into consideration what's going to happen, or should I just be cold and not care? And there's a lot of people who get caught up in that and just say, well, you know.
And not only that, but sometimes to people who do care about the economy, it's I guess I'm not asking a question either, but it's awfully frustrating because I know, like, I'll go into my neighbors' houses and it's sufficiently warm enough not to freeze. And they've still got the oven turned on and their 4 burners going and the space heater in the front room and 3 sweaters and they're still asking for more heat. And then I'll ask my neighbor, what are you trying to do? You can't, when you're using this heat, you're not going to be able to save it in your apartment for tomorrow, you know. And I just see so many people doing that, and I don't know how they're going to adjust when all of a sudden they use it up so fast that one day, you know, they're going to turn on their oven and it won't turn on. And they'll call up the gas company, and the gas company will say, I'm sorry, there's just no more gas to put in your oven to turn it on. And I just don't see how, if people don't understand that now and start to conserve what they have, what are people going to do, especially people who won't deal with it, who won't think about it as happening in their lifetime? What are people going to do when all of a sudden it's not there anymore?
Well, that's what's actually been happening. Now, in one county in California, there was such a water shortage that the authorities simply had to say you have to reduce your usage of water by 57%, it was. And gave all sorts of good advice how to do it. And they cut down by between 65 and 70%. It clicked, you see. At a certain moment, it clicks. People knew, well, if it isn't there, it's no use struggling against that. So they did cut down. There's no need, no purpose in worrying about other people. Everybody gradually finds his own judgment in these matters. President Carter, I read in the paper this morning, said, I will go and propose energy policies for energy saving, even if this ruins my popularity. Well, if he has that courage, I don't know, fine. So it's all coming. It's coming with a minority of people, a growing minority. Now, she suddenly changed from not caring to caring. You see, she's doubtful whether she... But as I look her in the face, she couldn't not care.
Exactly.
I'm also one of those people who waste. I'm a pig. I really am. I'm such a materialistic pig. But all right, self-knowledge. I feed to big business.
Into saying, well, is this the way I want to be when I'm Mrs. Gillingham's age? Because really, that's where you start. It's right where you are now, deciding you're going to be, even in a very small way, on the side of the solution instead of the side of the problem. Now,
I had to say we're almost out of time, so we'll wrap it up.
So, can I ask?
I'd just like to know your opinion. It seems to me that this is sort of like a vicious circle. We started out small, and through greed, you know, selfishness, we wanted to get farther and farther ahead, you know. So we do more and more, you know, invent more machines and everything. And now we're panicked. So we're talking about like in California, they waited till the water system was so bad, you know, the water was so bad that they had no choice. but I don't know if they've, will we go back after we brought it back, our economy back to where we can make it again, where we will go for like another 50 years. What I'm asking basically is, are we just gonna keep chopping it off until we can just barely make it, or are we gonna? How can we do it? How can we make it so it's small again? Because it seems like once we get small again, people are gonna want to make it big again. They're gonna say, well, Mr. Jones down the street has 2 more hens than I have, so I want to get 5 more. So I'll be better than him. It seems like it's just a vicious circle. It's going to keep getting bigger.
Well, there have been very special circumstances. When we embarked upon this expanding economy 100 years ago, there seemed to be so much coal, so much oil, it was limitless. And of course, at that time, use was very little. I remember when I was a schoolboy, and I suddenly realized that this whole industrial system is built on, at that time, mainly coal. And I asked the teacher, hey, how long is it going to last? And all the fossil fuels that we require. And he said, oh, not to worry, at least 1,000 years. Well, I said, poor little me doesn't have to worry too much about 1,000 years hence. Since then, of course, the rate of usage has increased by a factor of 20. And a lot has been used. So if the rate of usage is increased by 20, 1,000 years is 50 years. Phew. So all this system that we know has been built up on the assumption there's plenty, not to worry about it. We'll have to change it so that it gets onto a basis of permanence, or what you could also call a sustainable basis. Like a forester, he keeps chopping trees. Suddenly he realizes, my goodness, I'm running out of forest. So he then adopts a forestry principle called sustainable basis, namely, he only removes as much timber as has grown during the period. So that can go on forever. This we shall have to learn. When we have learned that, we are not going to fall into the errors that were produced by having unlimited amounts of fuel, because we won't have unlimited amounts of fuel. So it's not a vicious circle. It doesn't always return to itself. It is certain things have been done under temptation of a particular period in history. The future will be different from the past. So here again, let's not worry.
Well, can people change before crises come up? Like in California, they started saving 70% of the water when their crisis came. Do you think people can start saving their fuels before the crisis hits?
No, they can learn and prepare themselves so that when the crisis comes, they can look after themselves. Now, for instance, a lot of people with a water shortage are realizing, oh, well, the crunch is going to come. My livelihood depends on this irrigation. I'd better investigate what can be done with micro-irrigation. Well, where can I learn it? Certainly the Israelis have done it because they had very little water. Now maybe I should really make myself knowledgeable about this. That's the way it happens. Meanwhile, of course, I irrigate as before, as long as the water is there. Or I say, this bread, which I get in England, is not good enough. Also the bakers go on strike, or the delivery men go on strike. I'd better learn how to bake bread myself, you see, which I've just recommended.
Do you bake your own bread?
Of course I do, yes. I mean, how can you ask such a question? Well, then the next thing...
She's so used to people talking and not doing that.
Then the next thing is that I'm still dependent on the flour. Well, I don't know what happened to the flour. It may have been on the shelves for 6 weeks, and then all the vital elements have gone out. So I say, well, can't I have a flour mill? Is there a household flour mill? Yes, there is one. Hand working. Well, I want one that can work electrically or by hand. And as long as there is electricity, I'll use it, because it's pretty hard work grinding flour. So it's a very good use of electricity. But if there isn't, I do it by hand. So that's the way change happens, that people have a bit of foresight and they take steps. Of course, they won't take very drastic steps in cutting down until the pressures are much greater than that. That's the way it happens.
In Canada, there was those seal hunters, and they said that this year, if they went out again and killed as many as they did last year, like they always kill the babies, then like there wouldn't be enough, there wouldn't to continue, killing them. But they still went out again this year to kill the seals.
I don't know. There are many different situations. The great sort of killing of baby seals is normally done by the authorities, who say that if we don't kill them, they'll get so overpopulated that they'll all die. This is not killing. Well, it is killing, but it's culling to reduce the numbers. This is happening also in Africa. In certain places, you have to cull the elephants because otherwise they become so numerous that there isn't enough for them to feed on. And some people just take a different opinion, and they get very enraged about it. That is normally what happens. Now, that is precisely to keep the thing on a sustainable basis.
Okay, excuse me, I've just got the time signal, so I'm sure you all wanted to stay, and you look like you want to stay, but
I'm
doing as much as we can do, so maybe we can get together some other time if you can schedule. I'm sure that'd be fun with us. You can come and visit us at our school if you want.
That's right. We'll do it the Chinese way. The actors applaud the audience, and the audience applaud the actors.